Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Committee of Adjustment. This is a meeting to consider applications for minor variance and consents held under the authority of the Planning Act of Ontario. The role of the committee is to review the proposals that are before it, consider the evidence provided, and make a decision based on the four tests established by the Planning Act. In order to conduct an effective and efficient hearing, we've adopted the following process. Tonight's meeting will be live streamed and available for future viewing on the town's live stream page at oakville.ca/live. People attending this committee meeting are to be courteous and respectful of the members of the committee, town staff, and others in attendance. We ask that cellular devices be switched off at this time or at least maintained on silent. All remarks and questions are to be directed to the chair. All persons wishing to address the committee are required to provide their name and address. A maximum of 5 minutes will be provided to all speakers. Any submissions beyond 5 minutes will be at the discretion of the chair. Any materials presented to the committee for viewing will remain the property of this committee. Persons seeking a deferral or withdrawal of an application will be invited to do so at the onset of the meeting. If a request for a deferral is granted, it is the responsibility of the applicant to contact the Secretary-Treasurer regarding the scheduling of a new hearing date. At the request of the committee, the applicant may be asked to provide a brief presentation and answer questions that may arise. If the applicant has any concerns with the recommendations and proposed conditions found within the staff report, this is the time to advise the committee. All persons who wish to support or oppose the application will then be given an opportunity to speak to the committee. In the interest of efficiency, groups sharing the same view are asked to select a spokesperson, and any individual speakers are asked not to cover the same points as those who have already spoken. The applicant will then be given an opportunity to respond to the comments made by interested parties and answer any additional questions from the committee. Discussions will then be closed and the matter taken into committee for a decision. Once the committee has made an oral decision, any person desiring a written copy must file with the Secretary-Treasurer written request for notice of the decision. A green sheet is provided on the table at the back of the room for the purpose, and only those filing such a request will be given any subsequent notice of any appeal. A notice of the committee's decision will be mailed to the applicant and anyone who filed a written request no later than 10 days following the decision for minor variance and 15 days for consent applications. If you do not agree with the committee's decision, you may appeal the decision to the local planning appeal tribunal, and the last date to appeal will be noted on the decision. If no appeal is received within the prescribed time frame, the decision of the committee becomes final and binding, and the applicant and anyone who has received a copy of the decision will then be notified by written correspondence. Thank you. We have one regret this evening, which is Ms. Murray. Declaration of pecuniary interests. I have two. Mr. Hardcastle, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be declaring a conflict on consent application B1910 and CAV A022 of 2020. My employer, the Region Appeal, is the approval authority with respect to access control under Winston Churchill, and as such, I'd be in a conflict in participating in the decision on this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. That's been noted. Mr. Talowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too will lighten my workload tonight to reaffirm my previously declared conflict on CAV A004 as it is a related company, the applicant, and in addition CAV A025 and A026. They're also related companies, and I'm actively involved in that subdivision.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Talowski. That was noted. I'll be taking requests for deferrals or withdrawals at this time, and I will note for the members of the public, there has been a withdrawn of application CAV 004 of 2020 at 1435 Cornwall Road, Building C. If you are here for that application, this application has been withdrawn and will not be heard tonight. Again, that is application CAV 004 of 2020 for 1435 Cornwall Road. And at this moment, I will take any deferral requests or withdrawal requests. Okay, I see none. We will proceed with the first item on our agenda tonight, and that will be the consent application B19 for 2481 and 2529 Royal Windsor Drive. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair. My name is Kurt Franklin. I'm a planner with Weston Consulting. We're here on behalf of Mancor Canada, the owner of the subject lands. We have two applications before you tonight. We have a consent application to sever off approximately 4.2 hectares at the eastern end of the lands, which are located at the northwest corner of Royal Windsor Drive and Winston Churchill. The corner property here at one point in time was a separate property that was developed historically, is vacant and was purchased by Mancor. It merged on title with the rest of the property, so the severance will be for the whole 4.2 acres, leaving a 32.6 industrial property that is currently in operation, will continue in exactly the same manner. Minor variance is required to implement this as well. For the landscape buffer specifically along the eastern boundary of these lands. The parking lot extends over very close to the property line, and there is insufficient landscaping specifically in this area. This is a condition which we found to be very common within this older employment area. I submitted our application to the municipality with our analysis, believing that it does meet the 4 tests in the Planning Act as a minor variance and is worthy of approval. I note that all the comments that have come back from staff have been supportive. We have reviewed the conditions that are proposed to be implemented with a decision. Should it be positive tonight, we're supportive of those conditions as well. So I leave myself in your capable hands for any questions.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Franklin. You did beat me to the presentation, and that's fine. I do, however, still need to canvass the room in terms of who is here in attendance for application B19 at 2481 and 2529 Royal Windsor Drive. Are there any interested parties for this application? Okay, I see none. Very well. So we will take them as a package, the actual consent application and the related variant. Are there any questions of Mr. Franklin at this time? Okay, I see none. If you are familiar with the conditions that are set forth in Appendix A for the conditions of approval, and then we are happy to take this matter into committee.
Please.
Okay, very well. Who would like to move a motion? Mr. Tlowski, go ahead, sir. Thank you.
Madam Chair, before I move the motion, just a quick question for staff.
Yes.
Mr. Hassan, on the minor variance application, you've requested a condition that approval expired if work is not fully completed within 2 years, yet I don't see any work that's being proposed along with this variance application. So is that condition really necessary?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I actually had a discussion with the agent earlier on today. In regards to the scope of work wording portion of the condition, that would be in relation to the consent application for the creation of the new lot. So essentially, if the 2 years times out and the lot isn't created, that interior side or that interior landscaping width wouldn't be required.
Okay. I guess it applies under the scope of work, right? What's the scope of work?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, with respect to the consent application, I'll move that the application be approved, subject to the conditions found in Schedule A.
Okay.
I'm satisfied that a plan of subdivision is not required in this context, and that the proposal meets the intent of the provincial policy statement and the town's official plan with respect to intensification. Would you like both motions at once? Or?
Sure.
And then
There was nobody from the
and that no one from the public showed tonight. And with respect to the variance application, Madam Chair, I'm satisfied that the variance meets the 4 tests of the Planning Act. And I would move the approval of the variance, subject to the condition that the variance expire within 2 years should the related consent application not be completed.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Tlowski. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay. The application has been approved.
Thank you
Both of
very
them.
much.
Thank you, sir. So that covers the consent and the variance. Okay. The next item on our agenda is application CEV of 0020 of 2020 at 123 Morris Drive. Good evening.
Hi, good evening, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Glenn Wellings. I'm the planning consultant for the applicant.
Very well. Good evening, Mr. Wellings. Let me just canvass the room. Who is here for application CAV 020 of 2020 at 123 Morris Drive? Any interested parties for this application? Okay. Are you here in opposition or in support? Curiosity, you just want information. Okay, my question is, will you be addressing the committee? No, okay. Anyone else? I saw another hand. Yes? Will you be addressing the committee? No, we run a small business in the same property. So are you here for just information? Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Wellington, we are familiar with the application, that being for the new mixed-use building that's been proposed. We do have one letter on, that has been submitted that has concerns in terms of the parking, but I believe that was covered. This is your time. Feel free to use it as you wish.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'll be very brief. I was familiar with the letter that was filed. We're not seeking any special permissions for parking before the committee this evening. Madam Chair, the project architect, Bartek Bielny, is actually in attendance in case there's any design questions from committee, so we're happy to make him available. The proposed development includes a mixed-use building with commercial fronting onto Lakeshore Road West and residential, which is more oriented toward Maurice Drive. And the goal, Madam Chair and committee members, is to work within the present permissions under the official plan as well as the zoning bylaw. So that was a goal from the outset of my client. Because of the site is very narrow, and the narrowness of the site means that Lakeshore Road West is actually the technical frontage for the property, which does trigger variances for the side or flankage balconies. And to me, that's more of a technicality based on the shape of the property and the interpretation of the zoning bylaw. The balcony projection variances relate just to 4 balconies which face Lakeshore Road West. So the variances relating to balconies, in my opinion, are technical in nature, but they are supported by town staff through the redesign. Town staff is pleased with the design, and we've worked closely with the urban design folks from the planning department. The balconies proposed will not adversely impact adjacent properties in terms of spatial, overlook, or privacy matters. And there's, as the comments mentioned from planning staff, there's adequate separation from the public realm and from existing adjacent buildings. And committee members may have noticed that there's a significant grade change on the property, the low point being Lakeshore Road West frontage, where there's a fairly significant retaining wall structure. The first floor, being the commercial portion, will meet the minimum requirement of 4.5 meters. However, as you move to the higher portion of the property, the residential portion will be a maximum of 3.3 meters, and that's the purpose of the variance. And Madam Chair, just to comment on that, we thought it would be better, rather than achieving the 4.5 meter for the residential, to reduce that, rather than asking for an overall increase in the building height. We didn't think that was really the best approach. So the first floor variance of 3.3 meters is reasonable for residential. I believe, Madam Chair and committee members, that the purpose of the zoning bylaw is actually to achieve the 4.5 meters for the commercial as opposed to the residential. And that's what this application is proposing to do. So I'm satisfied from a planning perspective that the variances satisfy the 4 tests set out in the Planning Act. And the redevelopment will result in a high quality and improved built form and design for this property. So I'm happy to answer any questions. And Madam Chair, for the residents that are in attendance, I'm happy to spend time after the meeting to talk to them a little more about the application.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Wellington. Sorry, Wellings. Mr. Tusk, you have a question.
Mr. Wellings, do you have site plan elevation drawings capable of putting on the screen?
I do.
Just for the benefit of the residents that are here, that kind of information isn't provided with the notice. You can just give a very quick overview for them.
How is that quality?
We can get them to zoom in. Yep, there we go.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna, you stay up here. This is the architect, Bartek. Is there anything, Bartek, better than that?
Well,
Do the
obviously there's
renderings.
this rendering.
Yeah, that's much better.
Is it better?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So what you're seeing here is the commercial section on the lakeshore frontage, and this is the more east side frontage. You can see the grade actually higher to lower, natural grade on the road. So we are achieving the 4.5, actually we're over 4.5 meters for the commercial section. And as the grade naturally goes up, we're achieving 3.3 meters for the residential component in through here.
Very well. Any other items of clarification or questions? Okay. I hope, for the members of the public who are here for this application, if you have anything further to ask, this will be your time to do so by coming down and addressing the committee. If not, then we are happy to take this matter into committee, and Mr. Wellings will remain after the meeting and answer all your questions to your satisfaction as he indicated. So this is the final chance if someone does want to address the committee with respect to this application. Okay, I see none. Very well. We will take the matter into committee then. Who is ready to move a motion? Go ahead, Mr. Flemington. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having conducted my site visit and having reviewed the applicant's written submission, as well as the town's written staff report, which I do note that is in support of the application. Also, having taken into account the comments presented by the applicant this evening, noting that there was one letter in opposition of the application, as well as noting that there were no comments this evening from the public. I am prepared to make a motion in support of the application, noting that it does meet all 4 tests under the Planning Act. And also noting the conditions that the mixed-use building be constructed in accordance with the final approved site plan to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning, and also our standard condition about the approval expiring 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Flemington. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved. Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
committee.
Wellings.
Thank you.
If you, and I think they're just in the back there, the members that had their hands up.
For sure. Happy to spend time with them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Maurice. Okay, so we are looking now for application CAV 021 of 2020 at 1205 Garthdale Court.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Good evening, committee members.
Good evening. Your name and address for the record, please?
My name is Tariq El Mansouri, 67 Canmere Avenue, St. David's, L0S1G1. I'm the agent for the owner of 1205 Garsigal Court.
Thank you, Mr. Manchuri. Who is here for application CAV 021 of 2020 at 1205 Garthdale Court? Okay, you are here in opposition or in support? You are the owners, thank you. Is there anyone here who has an interest in this application? Okay, I see none. All right, Mr. Mansour, you have to take us through your application. You realize that town staff is not in support of variance number 2.
Yes, I would like to speak briefly about the item number 2, the garage setback. The existing setback for my client's house is more or less the same as the proposed one for the newly renovated garage, and it's even less for the adjacent house. We have 4.03 meters. And it's also the case for some other houses on Garsgal Court. And although the setback proposed is less than 5.7 meters, the space provided is still adequate to suit 2 large vehicles. And we still have about 4.7 meters behind the parked cars to the curb of the street. We also have 4 trees on the street which are closer to the houses rather than the street. So in future, if the city decided to put a sidewalk, I assume that the city will keep the trees and not remove them, and the sidewalk will be behind the trees. So here I try to represent sidewalk just behind the furthermost tree, and with the parked cars, I still have about 1.45 meters behind the cars to the beginning of the driveway. And also we have about 2.2 meters from the sidewalk to the curb. And because of the nature of the project, that's an addition to an existing house, it was very difficult to achieve the required setback of 5.7 meters. It will really make it hard to address the requirements for my client. And it will also affect the size of the functional rear yard, which is the most appealing element of the house. Actually, it will make it very small, which is not the design intent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Al-Mansouri at this time? Items of clarification? I actually have a question for town staff, Mr. Hassan. Now, given the fact that this part of Garthdale Court is not really up in terms of the sidewalk allowance, the plan for it, what are the usual, I guess, standards in terms of when you install sidewalks, in terms of the trees? I mean, the argument that Mr. Al-Mansouri makes is fairly reasonable for us laymen, but if you can explain it.
Through Madam Chair, unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure of how that gets investigated through the public consultation process for installing the trees, so I wouldn't actually be able to provide an answer to that, unfortunately. I know there's, through conducting site visits, there are hydro boxes and streetlights also within that road allowance area, so those would need to be relocated and removed as well.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Any other questions? Hardcastle? No? Oh. Mr. Mansouri, can you put that drawing back up with the rendering of the spacing for the sidewalk? Yes,
Sure.
that one. Thank you. Mr. Hardcastle, I see you signaling.
I just wanted to ask a question of staff, actually.
Okay.
In establishing the setback of the garage to the front property line, in this zone, it's identified as a 5.7 meter setback. What is the depth of it? Like, I understand there's a variety of different stall sizes, if you will, for parking spaces. What is the variability in terms of the stall size? I'm trying to understand the level of impact that an average car would have in this reduced condition in terms of encroachment into the right-of-way.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, that's my understanding in terms of the parking stall size, that would be the 5.7 average for the parking space within the property in front of the garage to not encroach within the road allowance. So in terms of the garage spacing itself, there is sufficient parking inside the garage, as noted in the plans, to provide the parking within the garage. But external to that, there would be overhang into the road allowance itself. That's why that provision is instituted into the zoning bylaw.
Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Maybe we can have a proposal and then have a discussion? Let's put something out there on the table and we'll discuss.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Hardcastle.
It is with respect to the variance for the reduced flankage yard, or sorry, with respect to the vehicle entrance facing the setback of the garage to the front property line, that I'll reserve my comments. I'm concerned, notwithstanding that there is an existing deficient situation, I have some reservations that would put the vast preponderance of vehicles encroaching into the right-of-way in order to be able to provide parking on this site. And the efforts that could be made either through a reduction in the size of the addition or to push back the garage. It's a completely new component to the building that was being removed and replaced. There are efforts that could be undertaken to push this farther back to remedy at least to some degree. But at 4.14 meters, I'm not aware of any vehicle that would be able to fit within that space without encroaching within the right-of-way, and I think that poses an issue with respect to the town. So I would put forward a motion that the variance be refused on the basis of that. I have some serious reservations, and I know we've been through this with other applications before the committee previously, and the staff has been fairly consistent with respect to not allowing for parking stalls that would encroach into the right-of-way, and I think from a functional perspective that makes sense. So that would be the motion I would put forward for discussion with my colleagues here.
So is your motion to accept the remaining variances and refuse variance number 2?
Thank you for clarifying, Madam Chair, but yeah, that would be my position, yes.
Okay, very well. So that's the motion that's on the table. Let's have a discussion. Are there any comments on this proposal? Mr. Talowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, when I first read this variance, my response was very similar to Mr. Hardcastle's. Where I'm struggling with Mr. Hardcastle's motion is it's an existing situation. So by approving the variance, we're not going to add any additional impact. This is almost a legal non-conforming use, and maybe that should have been the way they applied for it. So I appreciate Mr. Hardcastle's concerns on the surface, but I'm just not sure this deserves being denied, given that you've got an existing situation that is very similar and exists for other houses on the street, and it's a significant setback to the actual curb. So while technically the vehicles, outside of a compact car would be overhanging the right-of-way, it really doesn't appear to have any sort of impact on the street, and the nature of this court is not one that's in any way likely to have the travel portion of the road widened to cause a problem in the future.
Okay. Mr. Flemington, do you have anything to add, or should we just take the motion up?
Excuse me. Madam Chair, the issue that I have is similar to what my colleague just described, in the sense that, the existing property already does not comply with the setback. I do understand that, they are looking to adjust the property, but I sit here and go, I don't want to deny the application because, based on what my colleague just stated.
Okay. Very well. So the motion that is on the table is to accept the application as submitted for variance 1, 3, and 4, and deny variance 2. So all those in support of that motion, please indicate. Okay. All those opposed to that? Okay, very well. So that motion has failed. The next, we need another motion now that that one has failed. Who would like to move it? Mr. Talowski, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm going to move the application be approved as applied for, finding that it meets the 4 tests of the Planning Act. I will reiterate that I'm satisfied with variance number 2 in this circumstance, as I see it as an existing use, and I do not see that the variance, if granted, will cause any impact. I would make that approval conditional on development proceeding in accordance with the drawings submitted with the application. And somebody with younger eyes than me needs to read that date, and that a building permit issue within 2 years.
Very well. Mr. Talowski, thank you. Is there a discussion on this recommendation to approve the application as submitted? I see none.
I need the date.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it for you. I think it's October, yeah. October 30th, 2019. That's the last revision.
October 30, 2019?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And that's for all the drawings, site plan and elevation?
I believe so.
Well, we have to, it's going to tie it to it, so.
Mr. Hassan, can you clarify?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, looking at the legend provided on all of the drawings, it looks identical. It'd be revision 1, October 30th, 2019.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Yes.
We did some revisions to the elevations as per Mr. Brandon recommendations, and it was just modified before submitting to the Committee of Adjustment.
So we have not been provided with those latest elevation drawings.
It was submitted with 14 copies.
Mr. Hassan,
Yeah,
yes?
Madam Chair, if I can clarify, I believe like a new date stamp would be required on there, but all the drawings are the same, and they're the ones that were reviewed and circulated to the public.
Okay, so you're satisfied
Yes.
that we're tying
Yeah.
it to the October
Yeah.
30th?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, so
Revision
then,
one.
revision one, yes. Okay, so all those in support? Okay, all those opposed? Okay.
I need you to leave the two drawings that you showed.
The pictures and the drawings that you showed are the property of the committee, so you need to leave them with us.
Just the two, you only put two up, so those are the ones, if you could leave them on the table.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, just on the table. No, right there is perfect. Great,
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, okay. So your application has been approved.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. Moving along to application CAV 023 of 2020 at 1277 Hillview Crescent.
Good evening, Madam Chair,
Good evening.
committee members and staff. For the record, my name is Peter Vazikas of Empire Design Company, here to represent the owners of 1277 Hillview Crescent for the application before us today.
Thank you, Mr. Fazekas. Who is here for application CAV 023 of 2020 at 1277 Hillview Crescent? Okay, I see none. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. After your review of the justification report provided, our proposed site plan and photos, as well as the comments from the planning department, we feel the increase in floor area closely meets the official plan guidelines and closely fits within respect to the current zoning bylaw. We feel this variance is minor in nature and seeking relief from committee members in order to proceed for site plan approval review and a future building permit application. We understand that the planning policies must be adhered to within a degree of discrepancy, but the majority of homes constructed in the town of Oakville, as well as the entire GTA, are mostly four-bedroom homes. In this instance, it's virtually impossible to provide a four-bedroom home on this lot, given the restraints of the current zoning bylaw limitations of requiring only 42% floor area. On the average, most families consist of 3 to 4 occupants in a household, and every growing child requires their own space, especially as they get older. Also, some adults mostly work from home, either as a home-based business or as their satellite office away from their main office. In order to accommodate today's society, we must have 4 bedrooms where 1 bedroom can possibly be converted to a home office if need be. Now, these bedrooms are not large. They're average sized to small. The size of our house in building footprint, coverage, and height will not change, whether we had the 4th bedroom or open to below. The use of the 3/4-inch metal panels on the exterior face of the building, are also introduced in order to reduce the floor space by way of calculating around the perimeter of the building. These panels are costing the developer approximately $45 per square foot, which is reducing the footprint perimeter by 5 inches all the way around. This is one of the extremes the owner has engaged into in order to help meet the ratio of 42%. Therefore, the additional floor space in relation to the building footprint is irrelevant, as it will not be noticed by anyone other than the occupants, which is clearly invisible to the neighbors. Based on these facts, we strongly believe that we closely meet the requirements of the planning policy, section 1119. Now, having said that, I would also like to touch base on the comment regarding massing. Please note that for every effort has been made to ensure this home fits comfortably within the neighborhood characteristics. Each wall has enhancements and separations with the use of corners, windows, as well as large fascia panels which extend beyond the corners of the walls. All these features help to promote a non-continuous wall surface. The front living room, having a double height window, also creates a non-continuous look. If it were to please the committee, as well as the planning department, there is a possibility we can add an additional window on the left elevation. This elevation would seem to be the most affected in relation to massing. In addition, we are also able to lower the roof portion over the living room in order to break up the massing over the right elevation as well as the front elevation. Now, I do have some drawings that I proposed about an hour and a half ago, which I can show you what that change could be. I would now like to bring to the committee's attention a property that I have identified with a similar design compared to ours, our proposal, but more obstructing to the neighbors when comparing it to massing. Please refer to the photos supplied to you.
Were there pictures?
I'm not sure when this home was constructed, but it seems to dwarf the small bungalow next to it with large,
Oh,
mostly
he's talking
blank
about that one.
wall with minimal windows and features. It's a shame that this neighboring bungalow has a view of a deteriorating blank stucco wall. This home is very near to our proposal within the same Holton Heights district, and our proposal is more in keeping with respect to massing compared to this one. This particular property in the photo has been functioning this way for years without infringing in any way onto the adjacent neighbors. Based on the fact that the town has already approved such a design to remain, in comparison, we feel that our proposal is much less intrusive to the neighbors than this one, and hoping that the committee members may agree. Please also note that the current owner is proposing to sell this home to a prospective buyer. Without having at least 4 bedrooms, it would be extremely difficult for any growing family to sustain themselves in. Let alone the exorbitant cost to build this home may not equate to the sale price due to the fact that it does not maintain 4 bedrooms. Through the chair, during the course of a full review of the site plan approval process, we believe that any other encumbrances which develop through the process are able to be addressed to meet the satisfaction of all planners involved in that review. Also, I have already stated to include an additional window and drop the roof portion over the living room in order to break up the massing. This design has undergone major surgical repairs to try to accommodate the planning department, and we feel that these additional enhancements, we should be able to come to an agreement. Our proposal meets all the other zoning restrictions with respect to setbacks, coverage, heights, and the like. Therefore, having only one variance for floor area which cannot be seen by the public should not prevent this home from being approved. In addition, I have not seen any opposition from the surrounding neighbors. I too have been an Oakville resident for almost 20 years, living in a 3-bedroom home with my home office in a cold, dark, damp basement. I now reside in a 4-bedroom home, but with another occupant. Therefore, I'm still in the basement. My point is, the show must go on. So basically, whatever issues arise between parties, there must be some congruency between both parties in order to meet some semi-satisfaction in order to move forward. Madam Chair and the members of committee, based on all the information provided to you, we feel the proposed variance of increased floor area is adequately distributed within neighboring properties and should be considered minor in this nature and in this particular instance, and request the committee members to accept our proposal and grant us relief in order to proceed. If there's any questions, I'll be pleased to ask. I do have the sketches that I did prepare about an hour and a half ago, if you'd like to see them as well.
See, with the procedural bylaws that we have, we don't take last-minute drawings simply because we have to tie our conditions to those drawings, and we haven't had enough chance to review them, nor is it fair for the members of the public who have not seen those drawings. I would encourage you in the
Understood.
future, if you do come before the committee, that when you do have an opportunity to make changes, that you request a deferral, and then you can work with town staff, and that usually helps the situation.
I understand, Madam Chair. The reason I prepared these sketches is because I received the comments just a few days ago, and based on those comments regarding massing, I tried to accommodate that. So we don't have to look at them, that's fine, but I do have them for planning review.
Yeah, we're just gonna have to deal with the application as submitted today, since you've chosen to not take the opportunity to defer it and provide us with that information in the due course that it's supposed to be provided. So right now, we're just going to take this matter into committee as is, but I will give the committee members a chance to ask questions and items of clarification before we do so. Members, I'm in your hands when you're ready. If you have questions of Mr. Vozakis at this time. Go ahead, Mr. Slawski, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, Madam Chair, I just want to say I concur with the comments you just made to the applicant. The applicant effectively asked us to approve his application, but if we didn't want to approve an alternative, and that's not the way this committee works. Sir, you went at length about why you need a 4-bedroom house, but I didn't hear anything about any efforts you made to try to mitigate the additional size of this house that you're looking for. I see largely a 2-story box that, in my mind, doesn't comply, and I agree with staff, conform with the character in the neighborhood. But I haven't heard any explanation of why you think that's appropriate or how you tried to make this house lessen the impact of the additional square footage you're looking for. So can you help me out there?
I'll try my best. Basically, I'm trying to accomplish 4 bedrooms in this home. We did create some open to below space, which will reduce the floor area. We did reduce the wall thickness by using the metal panels to reduce 5 inches perimeter around the entire home. We're trying to maintain 4 decent-sized bedrooms. The rest of it is washrooms and hallways and closets, which actually concludes to floor space. The ground floor is not that great as well. It does occupy a 2-car garage. The only space I could find is the open to below and reducing the wall thickness in order to maintain a 4-bedroom home. Otherwise, it'd be a 3-bedroom home with a lot more open to below. There really wasn't much choice other than to reduce the wall thickness by using the metal panels. Was the last alternative, which you have before you.
Any other questions or items of clarification? Okay, I see none. Then we will take the matter into committee. Who would like to move a motion?
Madam Chair, I'm going to move a motion after conducting my site visit and having reviewed the applicant's written submission, as well as the town's written report noting that it is not in support of this application, as well as taking into account the applicant's presentation today. There are a few things that I view that may have been able to have been done to the premises in order to reduce the floor area ratio. So I'm going to move a motion that this application be denied as it was approved for, finding that it does not meet the 4 tests of the Planning Act.
Okay, is there a discussion on this recommendation? Mr. Hardcastle, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like my colleague, I've got some reservations here. Typically, when we see an application for residential floor area increase, particularly where staff have expressed some concerns and the increase is fairly significant in terms of a percentage basis, the efforts that we see undertaken either are deal with a reduction in the program space within the building, architectural elements or design details that will break down the perceived massing of the building or some combination of the two. And I'm not seeing evidence of that in the design or the responses that I'm hearing here. The width or the thickness of the wall, I'm not sure exactly what that does to the overall size of the building or the perceived size of the building. So I will be supporting my colleague's motion before the floor on the floor here. I don't believe that that significant efforts have been made to reduce the impacts of this variance, and I have some reservations that this does not conform with the intent of the zoning bylaw or the official plan. So I'll be supporting the motion on the floor.
Very well, thank you. Any further comments before we take the matter into committee? Thank you. All those in support of the denial of this application? Okay, the application has been denied.
Okay.
Okay. Application CAV 025 of 2020. Okay, no, actually, 24, sorry. Application CAV 024 of 2020 at 168 Castle Crescent. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, and staff. David Nelson, planning consultant.
Good evening, Mr. Nelson.
382 Bartos Drive, Oakville, Ontario.
Very well. Who is here for application CAV 024 of 2020 at 168 Castle Crescent? Are you in opposition or in support? Okay, so you will be addressing the committee. We do have some of the emails, yes, on hand. I have one here from Susan, and I have one here from Steve. That was it. Those are the two that we have on file, and we've read them. We're aware. You're welcome to address the committee. If you're satisfied that your message has been received, you don't need to. Just let me know after Mr. Nelson has a moment to address the committee, and if you do want to address the committee, I will have you come down and do so.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to point out the yellow outline is in fact the building footprint as determined by the various setbacks under the zoning bylaw. You note that the building proposed is largely within that yellow perimeter, except for this particular corner of the building. It's a very small portion of the wall, that would be the west wall of the building, that is requiring a variance of 0.29 meters in order to construct it in that fashion. From a perspective of streetscape, visually the building is oriented to Castle Crescent, so the visual front yard is in fact the Castle Crescent portion of the property. The visual exterior side yard is the Charnwood component of the bylaw. So the variances before you are with respect to the 0.29 variance to the required rear yard, because the front yard is in fact Charnwood, which is the smallest measurement on that relatively square property. The other variance pertains to the coverage, largely brought about through the covered porches on front and back of the proposed building. The pool is in a, under this condition, a front yard, and the bylaw is very specific. Pools are not permitted within a front yard, and likewise, an open stairwell is not permitted within a required front yard. So that is the application before you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Are there any items of clarification or questions of Mr. Nelson at this time? Okay, I see none. Mr. Nelson, if you'll just give us a moment to, who would like to address the committee?
Madam Chair and members of the committee. And this was in my email. Hi, Susan Johnston, a neighbor at 160 Castle. I just had a question around the design, and it's not necessarily dealt with in this instance because bylaw isn't a part of this, but I'm trying to understand how, and I know it's only proposed, but having a pool in the front yard and subsequently putting a fence around it would cause that fence to be within that visibility triangle, as far as I can tell. So the visibility triangle has to be 10.67 meters back from the lot line. And again, maybe I'm not understanding this correctly, but I would guess if that distance is 21 meters, then your visibility triangle is kind of halfway through the lot. And not only the pool, but that subsequent fence would need to be within that visibility triangle. there's already challenges on this corner because Charnwood curves to the left, and there is concern about potentially having more of a visibility issue if that pool is placed in that front yard, and then the fence is then erected around the outside of it. So I'm curious how that will be built, or if we're going to be looking at a variance to the fence bylaw somewhere down the line. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for your question. Who else would like to address the committee?
Good evening, Madam Chair.
Good evening.
Committee. I am Steve Forler, 162 Castle Crescent.
Fuller, Mr. Fuller, thank you.
I just wanted clarification from the town on these items. It does indicate that this uncovered access stair is rear and side only. I think that's item number 1. And that is, I think, considered a front yard. Near the pool there, that's where that staircase is indicated. The city, I'm just wondering if that's a front yard, why that would be allowed by the city. The second item is the pool. Pools are not permitted in front yards, and if that's considered a front yard, why is the city considering that as an item to be approved? If that's not a front yard, is it considered to be something else? Is there a precedence for pools in front yards in Oakville that I don't know of any? Sorry, back to that. If there is a pool put onto that side of the house, if that's not a front, what is it considered? And then what is the setback required for a pool at that point of a home? And my other question was, with regards to the item 4, the maximum lot coverage shall be 25%. There's a 28.77% is the requested size. It is a fairly, it's a fairly small property. The house that's being built on that property is considerably bigger than the existing one. So why is it required that, what is the need to increase that percentage in this neighborhood when that is considered the standard for that size of lot? Those are my questions.
Okay, very well. We'll get Mr. Nelson to comment on all these questions, and if...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Okay, so Mr. Nelson, you have to comment on the concerns that the neighbors have, and primarily the access stairs, the location of the pool. I think you need to take them through one more time.
Certainly, Madam Chair.
Because I don't think they understand the orientation of the home and how it affects.
Correct. We're looking at as a visual front yard being Castle Crescent, the visual exterior side yard is being Charnwood. The neighbor is quite correct. The stairway is not permitted in the front yard, and he's quite correct. The pool is not permitted in the front yard. Now, if that yard were considered, in fact, to be an exterior side yard, the setback for a pool is 3.5 meters from the lot line. And I think it could be accommodated. There is another alternative way of looking at this, Madam Chair, but it's done by bylaw rather than through the Committee of Adjustment. And that is to deem the frontage to be Castle Crescent. It's slightly longer than the dimension on Charnwood. If it's done that way, then all of the variances other than the lot coverage disappear. Because truly the pool yard becomes an exterior side yard. The west of the yard is interior side yard. This is the rear yard. This is the front yard. And all of those yards would comply. I did have a conversation with Mr. Hassan, and that is a very different process to deeming bylaw. It's done through council rather than Committee of Adjustment.
Okay. So just for the benefit of the neighbors, technically, the way this house is oriented, those would be the back, that would be the backyard, and those would be the side yards because of the fact that it's fronting on,
Correct, Madam Chair. Technically, this
Yes.
is the front yard, that
Yes.
is the rear yard, that's an interior side yard, that's an exterior side yard. But because of the orientation of the house, visually, this is an exterior side yard, that's an interior side yard, that's the rear yard, that's the front yard.
okay. And in dealing with it through the Committee of Adjustment and through variances, it's just a different way than dealing with it through,
Through the deeming bylaw.
Yes,
Yes,
deeming the-
That's a much
the
more
frontage
complicated
of-
process.
oh, it's a different process. Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Hassan. With respect to the fence and the notion of it being in the triangle, the daylight triangle, where does town staff?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, that would be looked at through the pool enclosure bylaw and the fence bylaw through the DSP process when the pool permit is applied for. It wouldn't necessarily be looked at in this situation, noting that the zoning bylaw indicates where the, again, access stairs, the pool, and the building would actually be sited on the property.
Okay. And through the development engineering site plan process, the neighbors will get notice of that, or no?
No, through you, Madam Chair, it's not a full site plan process. It's a downgraded, just development engineering site plan process to deal with the functionality of the site, the entrances, stormwater management, and municipal services.
Okay. So to answer their question, the fencing issue will be dealt with at a later date through a different process.
That is correct.
Okay. I think we've answered all the questions that they're
Yeah, just
clarified.
one other thing, Madam Chair, in terms of the visibility, the daylight triangle is in this area. And generally, the bylaw requires a reduced height through this particular area of the site plan. in
It's
terms of
15
fencing.
meters, isn't it?
Pardon?
10 or 15? 10? Okay. Depends on the, did you have something to say, Mr. Hadkastle? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just clarification through staff. The daylighting triangle, is it measured from an extension of the castle frontage, the intersection of the extension of the two lines, the exterior lot line and the front lot line? Sorry, I've touched my screen and it's turned off here.
I'm actually looking at my screen to look where you're pointing.
And measured downward from that point, so at 10 meters, it would be slightly behind the front wall of the proposed dwelling and not conflict with the pool?
Yeah.
Is that my understanding of it?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I'm not entirely sure what the distance is, but you're right, it is at the intersection of the two crossing property lines.
As it projects and not to take out the rounding of the
No.
corner?
Okay. Very well. Are there any other items of clarification or questions? Or are we ready to take the matter into committee? Mr. Nelson, you're satisfied with the conditions that are in town staff's report?
I certainly am, Madam Chair.
Okay. Gentlemen, who would like to move a motion? Mr. Hardcastle, sorry, Mr. Talowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just so Mr. Hardcastle doesn't feel bad, I touched my screen too and it turned off. Perhaps Mr. Nelson's got a remote. Madam Chair, I'm gonna move a motion by way of explanation, with the motion coming at the end, just because there was lengthy discussion here.
Thank you, Mr. Talowski, I appreciate that.
With respect to the fence, I'm satisfied on two fronts that the drawings in front of us would appear to show the fence in an area that is beyond a daylight triangle. But secondly, that the actual fencing is looked at under a separate process, and if it doesn't comply, it will be made to comply. With respect to what appear to be significant variances on the face of this application, I'm satisfied that they are really technical variances due to the fact that the zoning bylaw will always deem the shortest distance on a corner lot to be the frontage, regardless of what the functional frontage is. And that's what's causing the stair and pool variances in the yards. By extension, if the applicant were to turn the house to Charnwood and move the pool to the side yard and the stairs would move to the side yard, as Mr. Nelson indicated, the majority of the variances on this application would disappear. So I'm satisfied that these variances are largely technical, and the fact that the coverage variance is a significant portion of that is actually to deal with the porches, which I believe add to the actual house design and help it fit in with the character of the neighborhood. So, Madam Chair, with all that explanation, I'm prepared to move that this application be approved as applied for, finding that it meets the 4 tests of Planning Act. I believe I've addressed what I believe is addressing the concerns, comments by the neighborhood. And I would make that approval subject to the proceeding in general accordance with the site plan and elevation drawings dated January 2020, and that approval expire within 2 years if a building permit has been issued.
Thank you, Mr. Tulowski. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Very well. All those in support? Okay, application has been approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Nelson, previously do that drawing, the yellow one at the side, perfect. Great, thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Tulowski, this is your break. Application CAV 025 of 2020, and I'm going to take 026 of 2020 at the same time. Let's just, they are the same variants, I think, right?
Yes,
They're just 2 different blocks. I can do that.
Yeah,
We will definitely motion them separately, but we are going to deal with each
Good
one.
evening, Madam Chair, my name is Gino Alacandri. I'm here to act as the agent for Foxcott Village Estates. Inc.
Sorry, what was your last name?
Gino Alacandri.
Alacandri. Okay, thank you, Mr. Alacandri.
Okay.
Who is here for applications CAV 025 of 2020, Block 381, and CAV 026 of 2020 for Block 382? Very well. Are you here in opposition or in support?
No, I just want to understand.
You're looking for information?
Yeah, information and probably by the pictures, what are the variances and changes being proposed?
Very well. Okay, Mr. Alicantri, would you kindly take us through your application for the benefit of the neighbors?
So,
This is the new development of the townhouses units,
Showing it the
and
wrong
your
way
application
here.
is for the porches.
okay, so this is the site plan for the first submission for the 025 application. It's basically comprised of townhouses around the outside area facing Dundas Street, 8th line, MaxCon, and also 3-story townhouses facing Silver Maple. And the nature of the application is to get a variance on the amount of allowed opening in the vertical plane for the porches. The standard zoning bylaw has the opening amount at 70%. And
Yep.
we're requesting.
We can't really hear you very well. Can you just speak into the mic?
My
Thank you.
apologies. The standard bylaw for this area identifies a 70% requirement for the opening, and we're requesting a 40% requirement for this opening, as well as a 40% requirement for the extent of the porch that will be constructed to a minimum 1.5 meter depth. These requirements of 40% remain consistent with what was done in the entire project just north of the development. For instance, all the townhouses are located just north, on the north side of Silver Maple, and the homes constructed north of that, okay, between 8th line and the extension of MaxCon followed the 40% rule. So in essence, the townhouses were designed in keeping with the balance of the subdivision to the north.
Yes, if you'd be kind enough to just open up the elevation and you can point to the changes in terms of the porches, and that will highlight and explain to the neighbors what really this technical variance is all about.
Okay, so this is one sample of the townhouse block 6. This is one of the elevations that face Silver Maple on the inside. Okay, so we can see here, this is one of the end units, and there's a opening for the porch. Okay, and they are calculating the opening for the porch all the way up to the level of the second floor balcony, just below the railing. So it includes all of that wall. So you can see we have piers on either side that are quite narrow, and the opening is as wide as we can get it over that narrow space. And the same applies when we go to an inside porch here, where again between the garage wall and the demising wall, we've opened it up to the degree that we can, the maximum that we can. We can't achieve the 70% in these cases, but we're coming close in a lot of them. And the other area that we had difficulty in achieving the 70% is that we are trying to conceal gas meters. So if you see in the bottom here, you see that on the sides of the porches, we have raised walls that conceal gas meters. Okay, we also are trying to conceal on the porches air conditioning units. So we're trying to minimize the impact of these areas or of these issues on the streetscape. That was one of the urban design requirements during our site plan approval process. So this is typical of one of the back-to-back units. I'll just flip to one of the other elevations representing the units facing typical of one of the elevations facing Dundas Street or Max Connor 8th line. Again, here are the porches. We have two distinctive elevations that we're preparing across the entire streetscape. One is with the masonry enclosures, and the masonry enclosure reduces the opening down to, from 70% to the range of 50% on a number of our units. The second type of elevation along Dundas has porch columns and piers, which increase the openings to the degree where usually, as explained in the planning report, we don't actually need the 40%. We come close or exceed the 70%. So in an effort to try to establish different elevations to satisfy urban design, we introduced an elevation that forced ourselves to become a little bit tighter on the opening, but we tried to maintain the opening size to the degree that it was done on the adjacent subdivision.
Very well. Thank you for that explanation. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anyone else who's here for this application that has any interest in addressing the committee? Okay, I see none. Mr. Alejandri, if you're satisfied with the conditions that town staff have mentioned in their report, we are ready to take the matter into committee.
Yes, we are.
Okay, who would like to move a motion? Mr. Flemington, thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Madam Chair, having conducted my site visit and having reviewed the applicant's written submission as well as the town's written staff report, of which I do note is in support of the application, also having taken into account the comments presented by the applicant this evening, noting his comments to the neighbors. Also noting that there were no written objections from the public. I am prepared to move the first motion for application A025-2020
Perfect.
in support of the application with the condition, sorry,
Yes.
that the townhouse units be permitted in general accordance with the site plan dated January 22nd, 2020, and elevation drawings revision number 9 dated January 20th and 22nd, 2020. As well as our other standard 2-year approval expiring 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction.
Okay, all those in support? Okay, Application has been approved. Now you need to move number 26.
Second motion I'd like to move is in regards to application CAV A026-2020. Finding, I'd like to move it in support of the application, finding that it does meet the 4 tests of the Planning Act with the following 2 conditions. That the townhouse units be permitted in general accordance with the site plan dated January 22nd, 2020, and elevation drawings revision number 9 dated January 20th and 22nd, 2020, and the standard condition with regards to the approval expiring 2 years.
Very well. Is there discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Okay, application C,
Get my-
oh, yes.
Oh,
Application CAV 120 of 2019, deferred from September 24th of 2019 at 1473 Constance Drive. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair, and good evening, Committee of Adjustment members. My name is Bilal Kanani at Kanani Developments.
Good evening, Mr. Kanani. Who is here for application CAV 120 of 2019 at 1473 Constance Drive? Are you here in opposition or in support? Just for information, okay. Go ahead, Mr. Kanani, just refresh our memory from September of 2019, the changes that have been made to the application. I see now that town staff is in support of your application, which was deferred at the time for the new story development with an RFA increase.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Initially, back in September 2019, we had proposed the GFA at 335.56, which the staff and the members were not supportive of, which we then proposed another drawings reducing it by 15 square meters at 320, which was also not supportive later in the year. We were then asked to reduce it down to anywhere around early 300s, which we proposed at 305 meters square, which is only just 200 square feet more in the building, just for family preference reasons. And that's what we have proposed at this point.
Okay. Are there any questions of Mr. Kanani at this time, or items of clarification? Sir, if you'd like any further information and you'd like to address the committee, I would advise you to take that opportunity to do so, unless all your questions have been answered through this presentation.
And if there's any questions, I can personally answer them at the end of this meeting.
Sure, that's very helpful. Thank you. Would you like to address the committee, or you're satisfied? We will take the matter into committee if you are.
yeah, I'm just trying to understand what is the reason, what it look like.
Okay, so if you want to address the committee, then you have to come and state your name and address, and we will answer all your questions.
Maybe I just listen what you described.
And then you can speak to Mr. Kanani afterwards? Sure, that's
Thank you.
reasonable as well. Any items of clarification or questions? If you're satisfied with the town staff report and
Yep.
their conditions, we are happy to take the matter into committee. We are familiar with the application, and we have done our site visits, and we've seen the progression in the application. So,
Sure.
okay. Who would like to move a motion? Mr. Hardcastle, go ahead, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The applicant has undertaken efforts to reduce the size of the building from what we originally saw, and is proposing a design that, in my opinion, does not pose negative impact on adjacent properties, as the overall massing is broken up and components of the second story have been incorporated into the roof lines with step backs. So I find that the requested variance conforms to the 4 tests of the Act, in particular noting those efforts that have been done, that have been undertaken in order to address official plan criteria and the intent of the official plan. So on that basis, I'll put forward a motion of approval subject to two conditions. The first being that the dwelling be constructed in general accordance with the site plan and elevation drawings dated January 20th, 2020, submitted with the application. And the second being that the approval expire within 2 years of the date of the decision if a permit has not been issued.
Okay, and Mr. Hardcastle, there was one letter of opposition?
Thank you for the reminder,
Yes.
Madam Chair. So I would note that for the record, that there was one letter of opposition, and I think that the efforts that have been undertaken by the applicant have largely addressed the concerns with respect to the additional square footage of the house.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, application has been approved.
Thank you very much.
Okay, last application of the night is application CAV 003 of 2020, deferred from January the 14th at 171 Wilson Street.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Bill
Good eve-
Hicks with Hicks Design Studio, 295 Robinson.
Good evening, Mr. Hicks. Ma'am, are you here for this application?
Yes,
Are you here for information, or?
I'm just here to hear what's going on.
Okay, perfect. If you would like to address the committee, just let us know.
Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Hicks. We are familiar with your application as it was deferred from January the 14th. Anything that you'd like to add or bring forth in terms of information?
I think the reason for the deferral at that point in time was to see if we could reduce the house slightly and get rid of a variance related to the enclosed portion of the house at the back. We still need the rear yard variance for the covered porch. We worked with the planning department, and we're satisfied that the solution that we've come up with certainly satisfies the character of the neighborhood and is generally in compliance with the bylaws. Certainly the existing house has a 0 frontage setback right now, so we're certainly dramatically improving it. I've read the conditions of planning and the planning's report, and I believe you have either 5 or 6 letters of support from surrounding residents. Everyone who is adjacent to the property itself supports the application, so.
We did not get those
We did not
letters.
receive any.
You didn't receive them? Oh.
No.
Nope, there were some for the previous submission, there was none for this submission.
Okay, well, my apologies. We thought that they would apply to this, so. But
Okay.
It's changed.
it has. It got better, but at any rate.
I guess if they liked what they saw before, they're not going to mind what they see now.
That's probably my fault for not asking them to re-sign it, so, but, so. At any rate, I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. I think the application is fairly straightforward and is appropriate, so.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Is there any items of clarification or questions at this time? If you're satisfied, we're ready to take
What
them.
about the lady, is she out?
Do-
I just
did-
don't want to miss her.
Did you want any further information, or?
No, I just would like that you improve it.
Oh, okay. So Mr. Hicks will be happy to
She's in
answer all your
support.
questions after the meeting. You can ask him all the questions that you want.
She's in support of the application.
Okay, very well. Very good. We haven't missed anyone. Go ahead, Mr. Talowski. Send us off.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Mr. Hicks. This application's gotten better. It's better than what exists today. It's better than the previous application that was before the committee. I believe he's done a very good job on a challenging lot. This house will definitely fit the neighborhood. So I believe this does meet the 4 tests of the Planning Act. I'd make the recommendation for approval, subject to 2 conditions: that development proceed in general accordance with site plan and elevation drawings dated January 23rd, 2020, and that the application expire within 2 years if a building permit has not issued.
Thank you, Mr. Talowski. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? The application has been approved. Thank you, Mr. Hicks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members.
All right, we have minutes to confirm from January the 28th. Who would like to confirm them? Mr. Hardcastle confirms the minutes. Motion to adjourn. Mr. Hardcastle, motion to adjourn. We are adjourned at 8:24.